Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune. I am the King of Liberty, Kevin Fortune, and we are so honored that you chose to share with us tonight. Our Declaration of Independence starts off with this famous preamble that all men are, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Is that true? Do we live that? Do we apply that in the United States today? Well, being a libertarian, we focus, and people of liberty, we focus on individual rights and freedoms. But is that for all men, or in the sense of men as mankind, or is that just for certain groups of people? So we're going to discuss that today with another, from another aspect. We're going to talk about the transgender and LGBTQ community tonight. And we have some very honored special guests tonight. So we're not going to prolong anything. We're going to get started. And we're going to start off with a really great friend of mine, the world-renowned #1 transgender expert in the whole world, author, fashion model, whatever you want, one of the most awesome people I've ever met, and a definite woman of liberty, Dr. Dana Bevan. Dr. Dana, welcome. You're on the Liberty Show.
Well, thank you.
So, Dr. Dana, I'm going to give you a few minutes to introduce yourself and just tell us, who is Dr. Dana Bevan? Tell us a little about yourself.
Oh, well, I'm transgender, and I'm also a lesbian, so I can talk to two of the four initials. Let's see, I have a PhD in psychology. I'm not a clinician, I'm a research psychologist. And I've written 4 books on transgender science. I'm on the board of directors of the United States Professional Association for Transgender Health, and which helps to set standards of care for doctors and mental health people for transgender people. And I'm on the Ryan White, the local Atlanta Ryan White group task force, as well as HOPWA, both of which are involved with providing services to people with HIV in the local community.
Okay. And so tell us, I do happen to know, where did you graduate from? What college did you go to? Very impressive.
Oh, I don't know about that. I did my undergraduate work at Dartmouth College, and my PhD at Princeton University. Okay. And I should say that both of them were all male at the time.
Oh, wow.
And whereas I was trans then in the closet.
Wow.
So it was kind of an interesting situation.
I just wanted to throw that in just to show out some of your credentials, that you are very top notch, especially you're a transgender scientist. You're not just talking off of your head or just things you heard. You are really one of the top quality people in your field. Also, we have another special guest tonight, another person of liberty who works with the LGBT community in a lot of activism and politics, and that's Mr. Chase Oliver. Chase, welcome to the Liberty Show.
Hello. I'm sorry I'm not on camera right now. I'm actually driving home through a storm, but I'm happy to be here and talk to you guys. And unlike your other guest, I do not have a PhD. I am just an activist on the streets. I've been actively engaged in the LGBT community since I came out at age 15, so about 20 years now, all the way from starting my Gay Straight Alliance in high school to now. I am the fundraising director of Outright Libertarians. We are a charity organization that is devoted to bridging the divide between libertarians and we call it the gender and sexual minority community, the GSM community. So we work hard as an educational charity. We are raising funds for direct action to help the LGBT community. And of course, we speak out for the community when we see their liberty being threatened by government. So I'm very proud to be on the show and discuss these issues with you. And yeah, and I'm honored to be here with your guest, who is very distinguished.
Well, we're all very distinguished, and I don't want you to feel like because you don't have a doctor, but if you know anything about me, I don't know what Tim told you, but being the king of liberty, I'm about putting liberty into action. And I'm known across the country for that. So really an activist is just like the highest ranking you could have with me, because a lot of people talk liberty like we started off in our nation about all men are created equal, but we don't always live it or apply it. And this show is, we start with a public conversation, but it's about taking it after this show and putting our liberty into action. So we're going to get started tonight, as we always do, with one of my favorite conservatives, one of my favorite Republicans. We're going to go down to the great Sunshine State, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. David, welcome. You're on the Liberty Show.
All right, Kevin, how we doing this evening?
I'm wonderful.
Well, you picked a topic that's a little foreign to me. I can accept people the way they are, but it is definitely something that I have no expertise in.
Okay. Well, David, I know you have a really good, interesting question. What is your question tonight?
Well, I've got two questions.
Okay.
One is, when this topic makes it to the school system, at what age is age appropriate? I mean,
Okay.
It's being started at such a young age, they're not even waiting to adolescence. And so now we've got a government entity pushing it in their curriculum. And I find that part very disturbing. And
Well,
I've been a parent, or still am.
yeah.
Got a grandson that's just started school, and that's an issue that's very much on my mind. And my
Okay.
other question,
Hold on,
though,
let us answer that one. And that's a great question. I remember even in high school when they first came out with some, reading materials with same-sex parents and two parents and, even, gay in the literature. And it was so controversial, it made the national news and everything. So first we're going to go to Dr. Dana. Dr. Dana, please answer David's question.
Okay, I'll try. Well, let's see. In terms of the kids themselves, most of the kids know about gender by age 2 or 3 anyway. They don't know about being transgender until a little bit later if they are transgender. So kids do have a pretty good grasp of what the gender rules are and what the categories are. Now, I agree with you that I don't think it should be taught in school, and I think that's something that parents should teach, but they should teach it. Because the people who are pushing for that are people who want to disrupt their culture, and by espousing cultural relativism, if you will. But the kids are able to understand that certainly by school age, and they have questions. And in the past, parents couldn't answer them, and the school system couldn't answer them. And I'm not sure that the school system can answer them now.
So,
Okay. Chase, what would you answer to David's question? What age?
So with regards to LGBT issues, especially, I like to remind people that when they say, oh, well, they're teaching it to kids now, fairy tales teach heterosexuality and heteronormative behavior to our children. We have the princes and the princesses, and they go off and they get married. But we don't teach our children that they go out and have sex. We're not teaching sexually explicit heterosexuality to our children, and we don't have to teach sexually explicit homosexuality to our children. It's normal to say there are people with 2 daddies or with 2 mommies, or that's fine to be able to teach to young children. There's nothing explicit about that, and it's actually teaching your children about what exists in the real world, which is what education is supposed to be about. There's nothing wrong with explaining that. We don't have to get into the dirty details to explain that there are couples who are both male or both female. And it's not that hard to explain to a child that if someone says they're a man, they're a man. If someone says they're a woman, and you should just treat them that way with respect. I have nephews and nieces, and they understand that they know that I'm their gay uncle. And to them, at a younger age, that meant that Chase brings a boyfriend to Thanksgiving dinner. And that's not any different than someone bringing their girlfriend to Thanksgiving dinner in the family. It's a matter of what we're teaching. And I feel like too often there's this kind of stereotype that if we teach about LGBT issues in school, that we're all of a sudden teaching about sex and sexuality, which is something that should be, of course, guided mostly by parents. You know, I believe you can do reproductive health, especially as you get to the age of where you are of reproductive age. As you start going through the changes of adolescence, of course, we should be having things like that. But no, you know, and I see a comment here. Nobody becomes gay learning about gay people. That is absolutely true. My nephew and nieces, as far as I know, and as far as I can tell, are going to be heterosexual. But if they're anything, they're anything. That's their prerogative. But the point is we can educate our kids about the fact that LGBT people exist in the world and that it's perfectly normal to see them out and about in the world without having to talk about sex and actual sexuality. We can talk about gender and we can talk about orientation without necessarily talking about the nitty-gritty of sex. And I feel like that's where the disconnect happens between some conservatives. But in terms of teaching them about men who are with men and women who are with women, my nephews and nieces learned that just by having a gay uncle. They just knew that.
Well, let me ask you this, David, and before we go back to his second question, in schools, at least I grew up north, we did have sex education, usually about your junior year in high school. Do you think that they should, and we did talk about sex, should they add the gay sexual lifestyle to our sex education curriculum? What do you guys think? Starting with you, Chase.
I mean, as far as for adults in high school, you should also be able to say, you know, whether you're gay or straight, you know, contraception will prevent disease. Whether you're gay or straight, there's an emotional attachment to sex that you need to learn about and that you need to understand, you know, and that it's not something you just jump into, you know, that I think you can teach those lessons and also teach in a way that understands that there are gay and lesbian students. You know, you don't have to teach about the fine intricacies of gay sex, but, you know, you don't really have to teach the fine intricacies of heterosexual sex either, other than the fact that this is how reproduction happens. They don't get into, you know, the finer details, so to speak. So I think you can speak sex education to students that is inclusive to all students. There are LGBT students out there, and, you know, they deserve just as good of education about their sexuality and sexual development as anybody else.
Right. Great. What do you think, Dr. Dana?
Well, I tend to agree with that. But the times have changed, and their teaching core has changed, and they want to do exactly what Chase does not want to do, which is to teach the nitty-gritty at too early an age. And I don't think that the children will understand that. If they do, it wouldn't be a good thing. But I do agree that it ought to be just a natural thing that to experience people, different kinds of people, and at least label them, but talk about them. But I agree we shouldn't go into the nitty-gritty probably until high school. Okay,
David, back to Fort Lauderdale. What is your second question?
Well, first of all, I got to say hello to Dr. Dana. It's been a while since we've talked, and I appreciate you having this topic today and willing to talk about it. Now, the next part has to go with transgender. The elected surgery that they want is expensive, and transgenders are electing to do it. Why should I have to pay for that? Why does everybody want to get into my pocket,
right,
for their causes or their needs?
Well, I can answer that. About 65% of transgender people have their sex change, if you will, their transgender genital plastic surgery. About 65% of them cover that expense by themselves. They pay for it themselves. A lot of them go to Thailand now, which brings me to another issue, which is government. The government tends to, because they don't allow these surgeries all over in all the states, they make them more expensive than they need to be. Of the rest of the trans people who get those kinds of surgeries, maybe another 20% are covered by insurance. Some are reimbursed for insurance. And then you get down to other populations. And the ones that you read about a lot are people who are incarcerated. What you have to realize is this is a life-saving operation. It's required. People commit suicide with great regularity if they don't get this operation. And so it's a life-saving thing. So if you're a ward of the state, which you are if you're a prisoner, the state has an obligation to address that.
Okay, Dana, let me piggyback up on that, because this is a big issue in the libertarian circles. First of all, you brought up a good point, me being a finance and a businessman. Should insurance companies have to pay for this surgery? As David said, if it's elective, can you clarify? You said life.
Sure. Well, there's been studies done of whether you do it or not, in several both government insurance situations as well as private company insurance. And what you find is that the being able to cover the operation just about is equal to the expenses you would have if you don't allow for the operation. So it's a wash. So it doesn't really require companies to pay any more, and they may be paying less. Now, what are those expenses? Some of those expenses are for anti-anxiety drugs, and there are a lot for attempted suicides. And so the really covering them by insurance companies is both a benefit to the patient, of course, but it's really a wash to the people who pay for the insurance.
And what about the government? Being a libertarian, government spending is a big issue of mine, a pet peeve. Should the taxpayers have to pay for a person to get breast implants or hormone shots? Clarify, you're the scientist, but should they be on the hook to pay for this?
Well, what I'm saying is, for the most part, they aren't.
Okay.
So it's either covered by, most of it's covered by personal funds or insurance. And the transgender people contribute to insurance. They pay for it. Okay. So in both cases, it's not like there's money coming out of your pocket for it. They make a contribution to that as well.
Okay. And so what about the people, you touched about it, just clarity, the people that are in prison or in jail? Are there laws now that state that if they're already there and they've started the treatment, that we have to pay for it, the taxpayers have to pay for it? But what if they haven't started it? Do the taxpayers have to initiate, pay for it if they're just initiating the process?
There are no laws. Most of it is by court precedent. Most of the states don't do it willingly, either to continue hormone or other treatment or do surgeries. And it's almost on a case-by-case basis, although it tends to make the headlines. But when you're in court, there are a lot of experts who can come to the court and certify that that's a required operation or a required treatment. Now, some states do their best to prevent that from happening. They'll continue lawsuits for years and years, but by and large, where it happens, it's due to court precedent, not by law.
Okay, great answer. Some clarity there. We have a question that was sent in from Quincy, who is a law student at the University of California, Berkeley. And Quincy wants to know, do we have laws or should we have laws about parenting? I know there were some court challenges for gay couples to adopt children, or if there is a person who is say they were a man and then they went through transgender operation or whatever, should they still be allowed to raise their children? Can you and Chase, let's start with Chase. Chase, what do you think of that?
Okay, so first I do want to speak really quick and just say that, I have trans friends today who would not be alive if they had not gotten their gender confirmation surgery. And so when she says this is a life-saving procedure, she is exactly right. I have friends today who would not be here today if they were not able to get the surgery because there is a lot of mental anguish. I think we should all be able to put ourselves in the idea of if we were in a body that we did not feel was our own, that would be extremely distressing and concerning. Now, getting along to raising families and adoption and whatnot, studies have shown over and over again that same-sex parentage does not have an adverse effect on children. I tend to believe I have friends who have same-sex parents who are, as far as I can tell, are completely normal, well-adjusted adult human beings who exist in the world and who don't have excess trauma and all this other stuff. So I don't really see a need to say that, well, you're LGBT, you shouldn't be able to have children. Even worse is if you're a parent who is going through a transition, to have your children taken away from you, that is, and that makes the situation even more mentally distressing and terrible. And while I understand, some people saying, "Oh, kids won't understand." Well, that's why you have parents. Parents are there to educate kids. At the end of the day, families and parents, and that is the most central form of learning, typically that a child will have. If studies show a million times, if you read more, your kids are more likely to have a higher reading level if you read to your kids. So things like that. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's the government's job to raise your children most of the time. And I don't think if you can't prove that there is some sort of adverse effect, there should be no taking your children away because you're LGBT, in my opinion. I do not have kids. I'm an uncle, not a parent. But I would like to think that if I were a parent or if I wanted to adopt, I would not be stopped from adopting and being a loving parent just because I am a gay man.
Interesting. Dana, Bevan, what do you think?
Well, Chase is right. The studies have shown, actually, they show no adverse effect of same-sex parents. In fact, they show one benefit, and that is the children tend to be more concerned about other people, which is a good thing, I think. But these things have been litigated over and over again, I think, starting in Florida. Hi, Florida. And the evidence is pretty clear that there's no effect. Now, but that doesn't mean that the adoption situation, governments now give permission to private, typically religious organizations to reject those kinds of couples for adoption. And there are no safeguards about that. There are no rights or laws to protect the couple or, frankly, the kids. I mean, there are lots of kids out there that need to be adopted. And so those are at the state level, but those kinds of laws and those kinds of policies. But it's just unfair to do that. And yes, there's no reason why they shouldn't be good parents.
Well, that's interesting. And later on, we're going to bring in some of our guests, some of our listeners and viewers around the country to see if any of them have children and to talk about the impact it's had. What really made me think of this is back in the day when they did not allow, say, a two-parent white couple to adopt Black children because, they would not be racially or culturally, the same. So it's kind of that relationship and that correlation that just because the person is or the people are not, like you think they should be or whatever, does that mean that they're going to grow up to be so different or to be, abnormal, something like that? So that is a really good point. And that brings me to our special race relations coordinator, national lobbyist of, all kind of studies. And that's Mr. Damon down in Georgia. Damon, you're on the Liberty Show.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Chase, and hey, Dana. I had a couple of questions. First one's for Chase, and the second one will be for Dana. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Chase, and I've also had the pleasure of throughout my life knowing different people who are homosexual. And I think part of the challenge is when you have people who are homophobic, the challenge is lack of exposure, right? So people fear what they don't understand. And I think one of the challenges is if you have people who are friends who are homosexual, it's really just something that really has nothing to do with you personally, but people think that it's it's contagious. Like if you shake hands with a gay person, you'll be gay. But that leads me to a question that Chase I had that is it really could end a lot of disagreements and misunderstandings. Would you say that somebody is born gay, or do you think they turn gay in time?
So I happen to, personally, I typically think that sexuality is something that is, first off, it's on a spectrum. Many people who identify as straight or gay are not 100% either or. They may fall somewhere in between. They may identify as bisexual, but I do think that sexuality is something that is kind of ingrained in us. So I would say born this way, but how we choose to express our sexuality and our sexual identity is something that we have to feel comfortable with as ourselves. I identify as a gay man because I have never honestly felt sexual attraction to women. I'm not going to shut that door. Maybe it'll happen one day. But in the meantime, I'm going to identify as a gay man, whereas I have friends who also identify as gay men, though they've had sexual relations with women. They choose not to identify as bisexual. It's just depending on where you are comfortable with identifying yourself. But your sexuality is something that is inherent to you. It is part of you. It is not something that outside influences will make you one way or the other. Being around gay people does not make you gay any more than me being around straight people would make me straight. I had straight parents, straight brothers, straight pastors, straight teachers all through my life. And at no point did their straightness rub off on me and make me straight. I've always been gay. It just was until it took until I was about, I knew I was, even when I was 7, 8 years old, I knew I was different because I was, and I knew that. I didn't have a word for it at the time. And once I found that word for it, I became comfortable calling myself that, and through that exposure. But at the end of the day, I believe sexuality is something that is part of you. It will not be changed by other people. How you reflect it, and how you choose to express yourself, that is something that certainly culture can do. That is why we had so many more people in the closet before we had, pre-Stonewall, many more people were in the closet. And now you have people more comfortable with being who they are in terms of their sexuality or gender identity because culture has changed. So if anything, it's culture that forces people into the closet instead of letting people be who they are, their authentic selves are, and really being their authentic selves. So I think at the end of the day, we're getting better in that regard because people are more comfortable being who they are and understanding that sexuality is on a spectrum. It's neither like this nor that. And so I think at the end of the day, we are born gay, and society is now starting to recognize that more often, and we're seeing it more reflected in our culture.
Well, Chase, let me ask you this before we move on. So back to Damon's point. So people that go to prison for extended times and are not just exposed, but engaged, whether it's voluntary or involuntary in this, children that have been molested by men, that does not have any influence, in your opinion, on their sexuality.
Well, I think, honestly, sexual trauma as children can affect your response to sex in all kinds of ways. And, I can tell you right now, I'm the survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I don't think I wouldn't be gay had I not had abuse as a child. Like, I don't think that would have changed me, and I would be a heterosexual today had I not had trauma in my youth. So I personally don't feel that is making people gay. It might cause people, in fact, many times homophobia is caused because they had trauma as children, and that is why you have an outward non-tolerance of homosexuality and of sexual differences in gender and, stepping outside of the gender norms. So, and as far as prison goes, that is something where even the men who are engaged in that still identify as straight. Again, their sexuality is something they identify as themselves. The behavior that happens in prison and in temporary situations, that is an entirely different thing, though many of those men maybe are perhaps bisexual in practice, but identify as straight. And because, again, cultural norms and mores make people feel ashamed to admit that they maybe have sexual attraction to people of the same sex. And that's something that happens culturally, not to them. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
That society is kind of pushing them to say, you need to identify as straight, even though you may have attraction to men. I do believe that sexuality is very much on a spectrum. And we have far more bisexuality in the world than what culture and society reflects.
Interesting. Okay, Damon, your next question.
Well, I'd like to address that question.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, there is excellent evidence that for transgender people that they have a genetic predisposition that allows that influences them as they learn about gender to categorize and know. I wouldn't call it a choice. They just know inside that this is the right gender for them as they grow up. Technically, it's both nature and nurture, if you will. It's both genetics and exposure to gender learning. You can't be transgender unless you know something about gender. And so kids usually master that at a very early age. The culture comes in because gender categories are culturally constructed, not the biological part of gender, but the cultural part of rules and norms. And culture in a lot of places is much more liberal than we are in the West. Some cultures have 3, 4, 5 different genders, and they seem to not have transgender people because there's a lot more categories that people can be. With regard to trauma, there is no evidence, both for transgender people and for gays and lesbians, that early trauma causes that. And I should say, with regard to gay folks, gay children are recognized at a very early age. They are pre-homosexual, and they grow up to be gay people. And oftentimes they're confused with transgender kids. But we don't have as good genetic evidence on gay and lesbian causation, but that's just because they haven't done the studies.
Okay, interesting. Okay, Damon, did you have another question?
Well, actually, I'm kind of scared because Dana read my mind. That was my next question. I was actually going to ask because I wasn't sure. I truly had an ignorance of what would cause somebody to be transgender, but she answered it. And so Dana, I appreciate your input on that, and Chase, I also appreciate yours as well. This is definitely a conversation that we need to have as a society because, again, homophobia and any sort of ism, whether it's racism, sexism, whatever, it always comes from. I think it starts from fear and lack of honesty and having conversations with people. Because, again, if I had not known homosexual people in my life, then I would. It's easy to kind of quote unquote fear gay people because, again, you have this. You hear the stereotypes and you hear the different myths out there. Again, if you shake hands with a gay person, you'll be gay. That's no. Like Chase said, though, if you are who you are as far as from a sexual perspective. So if you know somebody who's gay and you're not gay, okay, cool, we can be friends, But at the end of the day, it's just about commonality and understanding that we're all human beings at the end of the day. And so I appreciate Dana, you and Chase's input on this. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Guys, just a reminder, you're listening to The Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune, the King of Liberty, and you can find us on YouTube and Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Anchor. Also, do us a favor. If you're on especially like YouTube, please hit the subscribe button or whatever platform you listen to your podcast on, and like us or send us a comment, even here on Facebook. And we're also on Instagram. We would love to hear from you guys if you have any show topics or any comments. Now, we want to open our phone lines up to some of our guests from around the nation to share some of their stories and experiences. You can just say your first name or what city you're in. Do we have anybody ready yet, Jerry?
Yeah, Tim has a question or comment, and then we have Lewis who wants to contribute after him.
Okay, we're going to go to Tim. Hey, Tim, you're on the Liberty Show.
Thank you. Shout out to our hosts and to all of our guests. It's been a fantastic show. I have a question for Dr. Bevan. She hit on something. Oh, but before I even get to that question, I want to acknowledge all of the Black trans individuals that were murdered at the hands of the state. The Black community hasn't done enough to show support for our Black trans members who have been slaughtered at the hands of the state. So I just wanted to make sure that I left that up. Question for Dr. Bevan. She mentioned something, hit on something that's interesting. She mentioned cruel and unusual punishment. There was a case that made national news. It was with an individual by the name of Adri Edo. And this was an individual in the state of Idaho who sued because he wanted to have a gender reassignment surgery. Now, the reason my question stems from his case. And the reason why it stems from his case is because I personally heard an individual mention to another individual that it would behoove us to be arrested, because if we are arrested, then we could get gender reassignment surgery paid for free. And as everyone knows, I do not like to have my paycheck jacked for any cause, no matter how altruistic it may be. So I stand shoulder to shoulder with the LGBTQ community. Should there ever be a situation that they need support, they can count on me there. But as far as my pocketbook, that's a different story. So my question to Dr. Dana is that if it is cruel and unusual punishment to tell an individual, for the state to deny an individual their gender reassignment surgery or gender confirming surgery, how is that, in your point of view, and Chase, please jump in on this, how is that considered cruel and unusual punishment if the individual knew that they were suffered from gender dysphoria? How is that the role, or how is that the responsibility of the state to financially pay tens of thousands of dollars for this person's surgery when they knew beforehand they were transgender? And the reason why I bring that question up is because this idea that it's cruel and unusual punishment. And I can see that to a point. Take, for instance, an individual, he has a heart condition, he robs a store, now he goes to prison. Should the state deny him his heart medication? And my retort to that, if I can answer my own question, is that the state shouldn't be responsible for paying for anyone's health expenses. The individual should be responsible. Well, if the individual is in prison, how does that work, that they're responsible? Well, the individual who's in prison, who's incarcerated, should be given access to a job to pay for their own health care. My own point of view. But I would love to hear Dr. Dana's point of view and Chase's response also to my question. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Excuse me, Dr. Dana.
Well,
Dr. Dana, before you answer that, will you explain, define those terms? What is gender reassignment and gender dysphoria for our audience?
Okay. I don't call it gender reassignment. I call it transgender genital plastic surgery, which is exactly what it is. Okay. All other terms for it are misnomers. I don't need my gender confirmed. I know what my gender is. Operation won't do that, and so forth. But to answer Tim's question, I think, or try to, if you're imprisoned, you are a ward of the state. They are responsible for your health. That's just a fact of law. And in the case of transgender people, their health is at stake, and so they're. But what we do see a lot in prisons is that they are, even if they wanted to pay for their hormones or medication or their surgery, the state won't allow them to do that. First thing they do when you go to prison is take away all your drugs, whether it's estradiol or some illicit drug. So that's just pure prejudice on the part of the people in the prisons. But you are a ward of the state. I mean, they are responsible for you. And but all that said is it doesn't happen all that often. Okay, there aren't that many transgender people who actually get the surgery or get, I guess, more get treated. But it's like pulling teeth to get states to do that, and typically requires long bouts of lawsuits to get them to do that. So the cases you hear about are pretty much isolated. This last one was in Idaho, but it doesn't happen all that often. So we're not out a whole lot of more money, but you could argue whether whether there are too many people in jail already. But that's a question for another session.
And I'll actually hop right onto that point. That was going to be my point, is that when people are arrested, when we are taking people's liberty away because they have violated the liberty of others, they are the responsibility of government. I'm a minarchist. I believe we should have a minimal government, and that's one of the things that government is responsible for, is for imprisoning those who have committed a crime and who have violated laws. And we of course can all say that there's far too many laws. Society is over criminalized. And if we're talking about saving money in the prisons, transgender surgery is not really the big money saver that people might think that it is, because a surgery costs tens of thousands of dollars. But when we were imprisoning thousands and thousands and thousands of people a year, well, their room and board costs far more than any transgender surgery is going to be for a transgender prisoner. And then we also have to ask ourselves, what is the crime that put that transgender person into prison in the first place? Was it a crime where there is no victim? Were they smoking marijuana? Were they participating in consensual sex work? Were they collecting rainwater without a license or whatever? What law put them in that prison? So when we want to talk about saving money and saying, well, we need to have less taxpayer impact on us, let's not over-criminalize society. Let's understand where the real cost structure is coming from. It's not transgender surgeries. And let's understand that the cost benefit of saving people's lives through providing these surgeries actually does, as Dr. Bevan pointed out, it's pretty much a wash when you have to think about the anti-anxiety medications, the therapies, the suicide preventions. These costs basically equal out, and then you have the cost benefit of there's someone not trying to kill themselves, and they're living their authentic selves and living the life as they choose to be in the gender that they actually are. So that is the benefit of that far outweighs the taxpayer cost. And again, this is also why I'm against private prisons. We shouldn't be privatizing something. That should be coming, when we deny people their liberty, that should come out of us. That should be something that we as a society say, that's a cost that should come from us. And if it's not something that's worth putting people away for, then we shouldn't be putting them away for it to begin with. So I hope that answered your question.
I have another comment, if you will, Kevin.
Okay, go ahead.
That is the biggest problem, I would say, for LGBT people right now are the LGBT homeless, who
Absolutely.
are on the street, mainly rejected. They're there because their parents rejected them. Some of them are 8 or 9 years old. I mean, they're very, very young. They're liable to get into trouble. They go into the street economies of drugs and prostitution and get involved with crime because they have no other choice. And it is the biggest problem we face right now. I mean, it is a big problem, I think, and that gets well, for one statistic is that in Minneapolis, they found that 40% of the people on the street were LGBT.
Yes.
So let me ask you, Dr. Dana, so should the government or the state, as Tim said, step in and deal with that problem? Should the taxpayers have more homeless shelters for LGBT, or what are you advocating? I mean, I believe the problem is real, but is it the taxpayers' responsibility to deal with it, or what? Clarify it. Educate us.
Well, I don't know whether, I'll have to think about whether it's the taxpayer's responsibility. But clearly, what needs to happen is that parents need to be educated and communities need to be educated, and that includes churches.
Don't even get me started on that point.
Right. That frown on LGBT people, and the parents are almost forced to throw the kids out, or that life is so unbearable with parents who are intolerant that they have to leave. So there needs to be education about LGBT people, and it needs to be aimed at the community and parental level.
Interesting. Well,
I'd love to hop on real quick on the homelessness issue. I live here in Atlanta. It is a major issue, as well as it is in Minneapolis, according to Dr. Bevan. And right now, we have the Rainbow House Coalition. They're a wonderful group in Atlanta, and they do a 48-hour camp out to raise awareness and raise funds. They're about to be doing that next week. And it's because in about 48 hours of being homeless, you basically get to the point of where you have to steal, sell your body, or do something else to survive. And so we seek to raise awareness about the fact that so many homeless folks are forced into behaviors and lifestyles that they really don't choose for themselves, but they have to eat and they have to live. And we need to understand and have compassion for those people. And is government responsible for all the homeless shelters and everything? I believe there's plenty of private ones, but I do think that there needs to be more awareness. This past year, the Trump administration sent a memorandum to all the housing and urban development shelters around the country, basically telling people how to identify transgender women through, they look this way, or they're tall, or they may have facial hair or whatnot, as a way to identify them and remove them from women's shelters. Now, first off, there's two major problems. First, we should not be kicking transgender women out of women's shelters. They are women. They deserve to be in a shelter just as much as any other woman. But also, defining people based on physical characteristics, you could very well be saying that person's transgender because they look a certain way and they are a cisgender woman. So it's just basically targeting people by the way they look. And if we're going to be stooping to that level, that speaks volumes to how society needs to change. And we need to have a better understanding of transgender people. Should we be having government shelters? That's a question for another thing. But what we shouldn't be doing is targeting transgender women to kick them out of government shelters that already exist.
Well, that was a good
one more
point.
thing to say there, and that is a lot of the shelters are private, and there are constantly laws and suggesting that because they are protected by religious liberty laws, that they can decide who comes in and who doesn't come in, and that includes transgender people or not. And there are lots of cases where transgender people died of exposure because they couldn't go to a homeless shelter.
Well, that was my point, Dr. Dana, that you both of you guys said that people, they end up on the streets and they have to sell their body or steal. And I was thinking, like, why would they have to do that with all of the homeless shelters and government or even private facilities and aid out there? But it is important for our audience to know that they are denied a lot of these services. And I think that's it's ignorance in the point of society, but people really just think, even if you lose your job, well, just go get food stamps, like it's that easy, or just go to a homeless shelter. But I actually know a case of a female who came from New York. She called a local homeless center here in Atlanta that houses families. She was all set up to come in. When she arrived, she had 5 kids. One of her kids, like 12 years old, was very effeminate. They said he was gay and they did not allow her to stay there. And it was just really something that, me being a big charitable type person, we're trying to raise money, find where can we take this? So a lot of people, I don't think, realize the discrimination that, once again, how I started this podcast, that all men are created equal. But if they are, why are we not allowing certain people to come in out the cold?
And Kevin, I want to say this right now, I want to tell everybody this right now, and that's a tragic story you just told about that family. And, you know, and in that, when they say, oh, well, he's effeminate, so he must be gay. My response to that is Prince was effeminate. Prince, the artist, was effeminate. He wore poofy shirts and sparkly things and wore high heels. And guess what? Heterosexual man. So, you know, and I really wish society would understand more and more that we can separate gender roles from sexuality. And in fact, you know, a lot of the times the guys who get the most ladies are those who identify a little bit more with their feminine side and represent their true selves and are authentic to themselves because they have authenticity. They don't have to hide behind some sort of male masculinity, like hide behind their macho, machismo, whatever it is. And so I would encourage people out there who are watching this, who are straight or gay, just be your authentic self. You know, that I just wanted to jump in and throw that in there that, you know, I'm sorry, I just had to comment that real quick. Prince was effeminate.
Okay, Chase, that was a great point. Prince was knocking him down, man. That was a great point. Right? That was a great point.
We're going to go to Louis next, but before, Dr. Dana, will you quickly define the difference between gender and sexuality? Because I think a lot of people don't, you know, we just mix all these terms up in the media.
Okay, yeah, they're all messed up in the media, and that's because they're messed up in lots of other places too, including academia.
Right.
Yeah, gender. Let's start with some definitions. Sex has to do with your sex assigned at birth by the doctor that hits you on the back of the rump and makes you cry. I don't think they do that actually. But and looks at your external genitalia and assigns a sex. Okay. And that is that there's an assumption there that you have other organs that allow you to reproduce as that sex, and that's somewhat faulty. Sex does not have the way it's typically assigned has nothing to do with genes or chromosomes or it's not defined biologically. It's defined by that observation of the doctor. Most people never get tested either after they're grown up. They never have genetic testing or chromosome testing done. So that's sex. Gender has to do with categories. Gender categories are socially constructed, and you can see this both across cultures, and you can see it historically. As I said earlier, some cultures have more than one gender category, more than two gender categories. And if you look back into history, you look at what people would wear in each of those categories, and it evolves and changes over time. So that's a cultural thing. That's not a biological thing. Okay. And then there's sexual orientation, and sexual orientation has to do with the sex that you're attracted to, the sex of the people you're attracted to for sexual behavior. Now, there's a whole murky set of other definitions out there for other genders and other sexual categories. You know, there's asexual, there's demisexual, there's and so well, all those are typically self-assigned and don't have scientific basis.
Wow, I'm learning something. Oh boy. Okay, we're going to go to Louis, our historical expert, and then we're going to open up the lines to people from around the country that possibly maybe are transgender, LGBT. They want to share some of their stories or testimonies. Okay, Louis, quickly, you're on the Liberty Show. Welcome.
Hello, Kevin. It's nice to
Hello.
be back. So something I think Chase made this point earlier that sexuality, we think of it in very binary terms, like you're either A, you're B. And I've actually had a similar thought before, a similar discussion with my LGBT friends. And the word that's always come to mind for me is gradient, like, you know, a sort of like a color map of all these different tones and hues, and it's all just kind of amorphous. It's not like a preset. It's not like there are like 60 preset genders. It's just like there's this big amorphous map that you could fall anywhere on, and everything kind of flows into each other, if that makes sense. I guess, I don't know, it just gets me down so badly that even though we're the richest country in the world and we have so many resources and we're supposed to be like, you know, the leaders of the free world or something, that it's shocking that we still are like not able to have open conversations about these sort of subjects for the most part, and how just like even after the Supreme Court ruling earlier this decade, it's like LGBT people still have it so bad despite our supposedly higher living standards in most other places. I guess I just wonder, are we as a culture just collectively psychotically sexually repressed and like not able to be emotionally candid? Because I just think back to like, you know, the 1600s. I remember I took a class in the British Empire, and like a lot of the early settlers who came to like Massachusetts were, you know, Puritans, like hardcore Calvinists who hated sexuality and thought that, you know, the human body is sinful and evil, and that only certain people are like selected, you know, predestined to go to heaven. And even though most people in America are not like Calvinists, obviously, I feel like that's sort of kind of bad, warped perspective on sex and gender and whatnot has kind of persisted, and we've just never really, you know, dealt with properly. I mean, we're in a better place now, I would say, but it's just like, I don't know, just to wrap things up, I just think of like how even more politically mainstream people like Bill Maher treat like trans rights as like a joke. It's something to be made fun of. Like it's something that only dumb PC college kids care about, even though, as Dana observed, it's a matter of life and death for many unfortunate young people. I just think back to like, I don't know if any of you saw the one SNL episode shortly after the 2016 election when Trump won. And there was I forget the episode name, but they made a joke in it about how it's like, oh, you know, Republicans were alienated from voting for Hillary because these crazy leftists, they have like the 55 genders now. And it was so snide and awful and condescending. Like, yeah, that's why people voted for Trump. That's why Trump won. It was the trans people's fault. It's just like,
yeah,
right,
well,
I'm ranting slightly, but
well, I'll hop onto your ranting and explain that. You know, I very much appreciate you saying it's on a gradient and that, you know, sexuality is on a spectrum, and I happen to believe that. And I believe that culture is slowly starting to evolve. You know, I mentioned earlier at the beginning that I started my Gay Straight Alliance in my high school, and that was 20 years ago now. And I got the pleasure to go speak to that same Gay Straight Alliance about 2 years ago now, and speak to them in the classroom. And the first thing I said is, okay, now how many of you have an LGBT person who is one of the central characters of your favorite television show? And everyone's hand went up. And I said, okay, well, when I was your age, we had Queer as Folk, Dawson's Creek, and My So-Called Life. Like that was what we had. And so you're starting to see more and more visibility, certainly of lesbian and gay and bisexual people, but now you're starting to see more visibility amongst trans people and trans issues. And this is the quote unquote culture war that we're fighting, you know, and it's constant. You know, conservatives always say, well, we need to stay where we are. We don't need to go any further. We're here where we're at. Let's not expand things. And then you have those who are like, well, let's progress things. Let's expand our definitions. Let's change, you know, the way we think about things. And I think we're starting to see that we are, as far as trans issues, the dam is finally starting to break. You know, I think even 5 years ago, trans awareness was much less than it is today, which is a very good sign. It's something that keeps me going, even though there are the Trumps in the world and those who push them and help elevate their voices. It's now more important for us to also make sure that we, and by we, I mean I'm a cisgender man, make sure that I do my best to elevate trans voices in the community, those who have not been heard before, because it was my voice as a gay man that was not heard 15, 20 years ago. And it was allies who helped me elevate my voice in society. So now it is our job to do what we can to help push that understanding of trans experience. If you don't know trans people, you have a very hard time empathizing with them. So I tell people all the time, I am far more understanding of trans people because I have trans friends now. I don't have as many questions because I can go directly to them and ask them that question and not feel threatened or ashamed or like I can't ask that question. So I'm now slightly ranting as well. But I think we're actually on a right path. We're actually starting to see more and more people open up about their understanding of trans issues. And even in the more socially conservative circles, you're starting to see more awareness, if not tolerance. You're at least seeing awareness. So I think that we are on the right path, but we do need to continue as a society moving to be more loving, empathic, and understanding of trans people. And I can just say it as somebody who's 35 now, who came out at 13 years old. I have seen that transformation, and I have seen it in young people as I have spoken to those who are a generation behind me, and see that their understanding of trans issues is, and this is in suburban Atlanta, metro Atlanta, is far, far greater than the understanding was when I was a 15-year-old. I feel like 15-year-olds know more about trans issues than I did as a 15-year-old, certainly.
Interesting. Okay, Louis, don't go anywhere. We'll probably have another question later. But let's open the phone lines. Do we have any citizens out there that wants to share their stories or make a comment?
Yeah, feel free to use the chat, and we can certainly get to you, or the raise hand. And just as a note here, we just passed the hour, 8 Eastern. So try not to be too verbose with your comments at this point as we begin to wind down a little bit.
No one?
If no one has it, I'll certainly.
There are people. There's a function that I think Jared's referring to, the function down below where you raise your hand. But
okay,
yeah.
Well, Jared, before you go, do you have a question, comment?
Certainly.
Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. So I really appreciate this conversation, and what wonderful contributions we've had. And I'm glad we're talking about this and focusing on this as a straight man with a number of trans friends, one of which tragically committed suicide a couple of years back. I know that this is a very important and timely issue to tackle here. So my question here for Dr. Bevan that I'm interested in getting her perspective on is the issue of not sort of black and white transgender people, but these sort of non-binary or third gender sort of identifying people. I've heard. What's that?
They're called gender non-conforming.
Yeah, that's a good broad term. So from what I understand in your work is you're trying to connect to a really scientific and medical basis for transgender people as sort of something more concrete to justify their existence and their validity to a mainstream audience. So I'm wondering how do you go about approaching this idea of gender nonconforming? Is there something in the science there that you can feel comfortable kind of connecting to justify this, or is this something that maybe needs a different approach, more on a philosophical level than a scientific one?
Well, I've been struggling with that issue to try to get that on a firm basis. What I'm starting to work on with somebody on this call is to identify the gender tasks, the gender behaviors, and then we can assign them to categories, or we can just throw them out there as a set. And each individual is free to feel about those behaviors however he wants, right? And that is partially, that is probably biologically determined. So what that creates is a spectrum, but the spectrum is not continuous; it's discontinuous. It's each little task in that spectrum. And it also accounts for that they're all out of order. I mean, some gender nonconforming people they're not all the same. They don't all behave the same. So somehow we need to get control of the behavioral inventory, and then try to do some definitions to put that on a firm foundation.
Interesting. Guys, I want to quickly, I was thinking about the issue of libertarian rights, me being a libertarian, and I'm just so much about putting our liberty into action. And I've heard it said several times tonight, one of my most least favorite comments is, we need more conversations. No, we don't. We've had so many conversations in America. We need some action. So I want to, with the final time we have, we want to talk a little bit about LGBT activism and what can we do as a nation besides talk, besides have symposiums and workshops and blogs. All of that, I'm sure, has its place. But what can we do to really start making a difference? Because I don't agree with you, Chase. I feel you that we've had some changes, but we still have a long way to go. I mean, some of the comments that I hear when I talk to people and I deal with politicians and candidates and just, I'm out there in the weeds, as Damon would say, and I'm just perplexed and just appalled at some people's views and different things like that. So let's talk a little bit about, activism and putting our individual rights and freedom into action. So I'm gonna start with you, Chase, since you're a big activist. What can we do as a society or people libertarian-minded, whatever political spectrum? What can we do to start helping to turn things around even more?
Well, first and foremost, education starts with those who are close to you. So if you are someone who is an ally or is a member of the LGBTQ community, be active and actually be active in your community. When you see something that you view as homophobic or transphobic, don't be afraid to call that out and make that an education moment for you and your friends. Conversation is action sometimes. Sometimes you have to come to people and you have to say, man, this is not the right way to be thinking, man, or you need to put yourself in their shoes. You need to understand what's going on. And so many times, a lot of the opposition to LGBT issues is a lack of education, a lack of knowing who they are. Harvey Milk once said, and I'm paraphrasing here because I just saw the film Milk recently, but they vote for us 2-1 if they vote for us 2-1 if they know us, and that's part of it. Part of it is being out and in the community, being active in your political process. I'm very active in the Libertarian Party because I want the Libertarian Party to be the home for gender and sexual minorities who are looking for a political home, being out and about. Like, I became a libertarian because the Libertarian Party of Georgia decided to do direct voter outreach at Atlanta Pride, because they were the only political party in 2010 who felt like maybe we need to be reaching out to LGBT voters and talking to them about these issues and educating them about liberty and about how the liberty perspective is actually going to help them live a more free and equal life in the end. But at the end of the day, you have to be visible in your community. You cannot just be somebody who, first off, don't be a keyboard warrior. Don't be somebody who's just on Facebook, who is just talking and commenting, because that's not where minds change. Minds do not change on Facebook and Twitter. Minds get changed in the street. Minds get changed at the activist level. You have to actually be there. If you're not at the city council meetings, if you're not at the actual meetings that are going on and speaking to the people, are you really being heard? You're not. And that's something that I know, Tim Smith, who was commenting earlier, that's something he's very passionate about when it comes to issues around communities of color. You have to be active. If you're just floating in the wind and you are not getting in the streets, but yes, marching in the streets is one of the things you do have to do. Being visible within your own community, in your own activist community. I'm very active with the Black Lives Matter movement, but I'm also saying that it's not just Black Lives Matter. All lives won't matter until Black Lives matter, but Black lives don't matter until Black trans lives matter. So we have to communicate with other communities who are fighting for equality, for liberty, and create those connections. But at the end of the day, it's not going to happen behind the keyboard on Facebook. That's the most important thing I would say to folks out there, is you're not going to get things done sitting on your butt on Facebook.
Well, that's what I was saying about conversation. We get people that even libertarians, or I've been with the Libertarian Party, or just all different parties. But we talk one thing, but like you said, our actions aren't there. I actually had people tonight that normally are on, but they didn't feel comfortable. And I'm like, well, how are you a person of liberty? And we're going to close on that, but I'm going to really open a can of worms if Jared allows me. But I want Dr. Dana to answer that. Then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about people of color and Black transgender LGBT, because they face even more circumstances. But I want to talk about the movement, how the LGBT movement came out of the civil rights movement, but even how some people think it's kind of competing with that. So we're going to talk about that. But first, Dr. Dana, what can people do to help the transgender community to go to the next level?
Well, it's correct that we need more visibility. The gay rights movement used that to their benefit. I recall that there was an activity for gay lesbian couples to invite their congressmen to dinner to show that they were, real people. But nothing changes minds other than more directly than having someone in your family who is gay or trans. And that changes a lot of, Dick Cheney changed his tune pretty quick when one of his kids came out. So, and it's not just the 6 or 7% of LGBT people, they have families and they're getting acceptance to some extent in their families, or at least visibility. Now, one statistic I should throw out is that there's more to come. 80% of transgender people are still in the closet. 80%.
Wow.
And we're attempting to do, and very little is known about them. We know, what we have an estimate of transgender people, and of a couple million, maybe 3 million. Now, I can only account in public life for about 400,000 of those, and very few of those even have completed transition. So we're trying to do a study now for what are called cross-dressers. That's their term for themselves, to understand who they are and what their needs are. So there's lots more to come. There are lots of transgender people who might come out at some point. So we know how to change culture. The civil rights movements and other movements taught us how to do that. So there are lots of best practices there. But education is important. But mainly it's getting out there and being visible and showing people that you're not some weirdo.
Well, I guess I always say I do so many different things, but being a business coach, life coach, and everything, and Damon and Tim, even in our we have an activism call once a month, and our foundation, one of them is relationship, and that's my point is you've got to have a relationship with people. That doesn't mean it's physical or intimate, but relationship. And just because you sit by somebody on a bus or work with them is not, necessarily a relationship, and that's something that we're losing, I think, in a lot of circles around our country, in our nation, and now is just relationship with each other. Maybe it's the internet or whatever, but we really need relationship. Did you have a comment, Chase, before we close out?
Yes, I just wanted to say one more thing about activism and the liberty movement and the LGBT movement. I really do think that a lot of people in the liberty movement could actually learn a lot from the movement for LGBT civil rights in terms of getting things done.
I agree with amen, brother.
If you want to go back and look at the way ACT UP during the height of the HIV/AIDS crisis, there was the group ACT UP who was all about direct action. You want to talk about shutting things down, I bet a lot of libertarians would really like to shut the FDA down. Well, that's what ACT UP did in 1992 when they were not being responsive enough for HIV/AIDS drugs and the processes to get drugs to market. So, I think a lot of those in the liberty movement could really take a page out of the books of the fight that the LGBT community has had, apply those to libertarian principles, organize in the way that ACT UP did with that activist energy, and you could see a lot of things changing, not just with LGBT issues, but in the whole liberty spectrum. So I would encourage those who are libertarians now, who have not done the look into the history of the LGBT civil rights movement, look at, Stonewall itself was originally an action against police overreach and police abuses of LGBT people in New York City. It was a riot against government overreach and government abuse. And ACT UP, much of the same way, was speaking truth to power to government. We should be able to harness that energy within the libertarian community, and it takes a lot of understanding LGBT history to harness that energy. So I hope we can, as a party, as a liberty movement, as a force for liberty in this country, we harness that same practice, that same energy, that same enthusiasm that the LGBT community did when they were fighting for their lives at the height of the HIV/AIDS crisis. That being said, I do want to let you guys know I'm going to be heading out because it appears the rain is just getting worse and this parking lot I'm in is starting to flood. So I'm going to start driving home and get home safe and be dry. But I wanted to say it was a blessing to come on here and speak to y'all. Dr. Bevan, I would love to connect with you after this and continue that conversation. Outright libertarians would love to work with you in that regard. But thank you guys for having me on. And I'm going to keep myself in mute and the camera off for the rest of this so I can listen as I head home.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chase. You are a great asset to our conversation tonight. And I don't know what Tim told you about me. He probably told you I'm crazy. But I'm so crazy to believe that we should put our liberty into action. And I have spent my life, my goal is to make libertarianism a household word. And we just really honor you and thank you for what you've done for the movement, and continue. And anytime you need me or our movement, just let us know. Also, so the final question, Jared, if Jared gives me like 3 more minutes, I mentioned about the civil rights movement and how the LGBT movement came out of that. But there's also controversy that a lot of people are a little disheartened that the LGBTs are infringing upon the rights of Blacks, or taking, especially a lot of times when you have minority funding, a minority whatever, and they've added in all these different categories and different people. So I'm going to let Tim and Damon comment on that, and then Dr. Dana answer any questions. But Tim or Damon, what do you guys think about that?
Real quick, I know Sherry has a question
Sherry,
or comment that she's trying to get in. So
Sherry,
let's
go ahead.
give her the stage.
I really apologize. I'm sorry.
You need to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Hi.
Hey, Sherry, welcome. Yes, welcome to the Liberty Show.
Thank you. I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Dana, who is a dear, dear friend of mine for way more years than y'all know. And I'm so proud of her for her living her true life. I'm a gay woman. I was married 31 years, and I'm now with my wonderful partner, Cheryl, for 25 years. And I'm so happy to see what you all are doing, and I'm so supportive. And I just wish people would take the word sexual out of homosexual. Everybody would be happy then. They just go to the sexual part. We're so much more. We are so much more than that.
Great
so much
point.
More.
That's a great point. I'm sorry. That is beautiful.
That's all I have to say. I'm happy to meet you all, and I'm so happy to be in connection with Dana again. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That was such a beautiful point. And I agree. That's, where I'm getting to. We talk so much in America about liberty and rights and freedoms, but all I have to say is, where is it? Put your money where your mouth is. Okay, Damon, Tim, who wants to be first? Damon.
Yeah, so as far as, I guess your question was about the LGBTQ as it relates to the civil rights movement, is that right?
Yeah, and as far as, participating, being a minority, and, there is a lot of controversy about that. There are people that want to kind of kick them out or put them separate. Should they be a part of the civil rights movement, reparations movement, or should they have their own movement?
Well, when we talk about reparations, we're talking about the descendants of American slaves. There should not be any distinction between a homosexual or a heterosexual Black person as it pertains to that. You're basically, if you are if reparations was to be paid to descendants of American slaves, it is to Black people who can trace their lineage to the people who were in the slave fields of the American South. So if you're homosexual, that has nothing to do with anything.
Okay. What about the movement in general? The fact that people, we were discussing this, well, it was something that they were talking about minorities, and even I think the Black Lives Matter movement, instead of just dealing with the Black and racial issues, they were adding in LGBT, adding in white women and different things like that. And there were some people that were very uncomfortable or even angry that they were adding these people. And what do you think of that?
Well, Dr. Claude Anderson, for those that aren't aware, he's written some very powerful books, Black Labor, White Wealth, and Powernomics being two of the main ones that he's written. And basically, his sentiment is that when they start talking about minority, they start talking about disenfranchised groups, it's really a bag of trick bag language where they try to take the focus off of Black. Because when we look at, let's say, affirmative action as an example, many people will be surprised, but white women are some of the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action. Now, the stereotype and the myth is that Black people benefit from affirmative action, and it's unqualified Black people, which that kind of lends into the whole idea of white supremacy, which kind of assumes and presumes that white people are just naturally inherently better than Black people. So if there's, let's say, an open position at a company, and the assumption is that, well, I didn't get a job if I'm a white male, I didn't get the job because I'm a white male, this Black guy got the job. Well, the inherent assumption in that is that, well, the Black guy wasn't qualified. Well, in the case of affirmative action, when it started out, it was meant to address systematic oppression, but what is emerged into is when they use the trick bag language of minorities and disenfranchised groups, well, now women can jump in there. If they're saying LGBTQ in a separate plane, then it lets them get in there. But if we're talking about trying to make reparations for the descendants of American slaves, then LGBTQ, any other designation other than Black should have no relevance.
Okay. Tim, quick comment. Timothy, what do you think of that?
I agree with, no, I'm here, I'm sorry. I agree with Damon's sentiment. I would like to hear, though, from Carol or Caroline. I really don't have anything to add other than, I agree with Damon's sentiment. The problem that we get into, and this is, in my humble opinion, what I believe the LGBTQ community has done, and they're not the only ones. If we look at the latest insurrection of the slaves that started earlier this year, we will see where other groups try to attach their issues to the Black Lives Matter movement. And the Black Lives Matter movement, in the media is guilty of trying to conflate issues with Black issues. And I agree, the Black community has done a terrible job at addressing and acknowledging Black trans lives. So we screw that up. But at the same time, the LGBTQ community at large, or their issues at large, if I can say it that way, they're not our issues. The Black Lives movement, or Black Lives Matter movement, our movement is to one thing, and that is to Black folks not being murdered and slaughtered by the state. Anything you add on top of that conflates, and not only does it conflate, it weakens our movement. If we're talking about reparations, as Damon has stated, reparations is for Black folks, the descendants of slaves. Now, do the LGBTQ community have a legitimate ought against the state that should be financially settled? Sure. The state, if we look at Stonewall, the state was guilty of harassing, beating down the members of the LGBTQ community. But my beef is particularly when we speak to Black Lives Matter, that movement should just simply be about stopping the state from slaughtering and killing and harassing Black folks. But I would love to hear Caroline or Carol, and I do appreciate everyone today.
Okay, before we close, Carol or Caroline, would you guys like to have anything to say?
I guess I just would say that if we're truly libertarian about it, an employer should be able to choose who they hire, without any government saying they have to prefer one over another. I mean, I don't know that I would, reparations is a whole different issue. So I guess I'm kind of on the same page there that,
Well, but you brought up a good point. I'm glad you said something. Caroline is a great friend of mine. You've been a supporter of working with us for years and years and years. Even I think she started when she was like 12 because she's only 29 now. But Caroline, we're glad to have you. But no, that's a great point of mine too. I don't believe in these, I believe in affirmative action, the concept, and I understand. I'm a little older than Damon and Tim, so I know where it came from. But once again, it has gotten just out of pocket to where it's not even dealing with the real issue. But we should not have these labels, and we shouldn't force people to hire people, but we also shouldn't have a problem where they are denied also. So thank you for that. Yes.
If I could just, I'm sorry, I was just listening, and I wanted to pop on real quick and just say one thing.
I thought you disappeared.
I know, I'm driving, and I'm trying to be safe about this, but I just wanted to say one thing here. I have never once heard an LGBT activist say that we need to have reparations. I don't believe that that's an issue. I could be wrong, but I have never heard that personally. And as far as Black Lives Matter, yes, the issue should be around police violence against those who are even more so put down than the average person, which would be communities of color and the poor. But at the end of the day, a lot of the solutions actually help everyone. At the end of the day, if we were to implement some of the changes that Black Lives Matter is fighting for. So while we are focusing on black victims of police brutality by the state, we can also recognize that many of the solutions that would help break down the systemic barriers and institutional racism that exists in the world would also benefit the average American citizen, who is also being, to a much lesser extent, brought down by the state.
Okay.
Respectfully, Chase, the average citizen then needs to take up their own fight. That's not for Black folks to be concerned about our white compatriots. I don't go out.
I'm not saying it's the same thing. What I'm saying is that when people go out and they're supporting Black Lives Matter, at the end of the day, it's going to support more liberty for everyone if we were to have a more equitable and less systemically racist society. It would actually benefit not just Black and brown people, but everyone if we broke down the barriers of systemic racism in the world.
But that, Chase, no, I don't want to take up too much time. I don't want Jared to fire me. But that's our point. We're muddying the waters. There has been so much systemic racism and prejudice that even maybe some white LGBT, but they've never experienced what some other people have gone through. So what they're saying is, can they have their day in the sun and let you guys have yours? And I'm just saying, we're not agreeing or disagreeing, but a lot of people are very offended. Does that make sense?
I agree. And what I'm saying is that I'm trying to elevate voices that are beyond my own. I understand and recognize and understand that that's the importance of Black Lives Matter, is to not elevate my voice as a cisgender heterosexual white guy, but my job is to be out there in support of the Black community and to let them elevate their voices and let them speak to the issues. And my job is to listen and to learn and to support. And that is, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say that being gay is in any way equivalent to being Black. There are so many differences that apples and oranges doesn't even begin to describe those differences.
I agree with you. I agree with you, but what I'm saying, I guess I deal with this so much, but they have been intertwining it. And even when when the Black Lives Matter testified in DC, they brought in the gay and LGBT community and different things like this. And what we're saying, a lot of people that are starting to get more offended. So I just wanted to bring that up. Any final comments, Tim, and then Dr. Dana, you're going to close this out. Thank you guys for another wonderful show.
I just want to thank Chase. Chase has been a friend to BLM, not only to BLM, the movement, not the organization, because as we all know, the organization is full of Marxists, and we're not Marxists. He's been a friend to the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and he's also been a great friend to Liberty. So I want to thank Chase. He's been cool. And I appreciate the topic. I appreciate listening to everyone, to Dr. Dana, to Chase. It's just been an awesome experience. So thank you.
Okay. Dr. Dana, please close us out before Jared fires me.
Well, I would just reemphasize what Carolyn brought up, and that is, as libertarians, you should not be dependent on the government to solve your problems. And we tend to think about that because the government's been in that business for a while, but they've done a pretty poor job of it.
Oh, they failed. They're gone out of it. Oh, great. Thank you. I'm not even going to get started on that one. But yeah, matter of fact, next month, November the 14th, we're going to talk about voting rights and the elections. And Dr. Dana, if you would, or send a representative, we want to actually talk about the transgender community and how the problems with that in voting. But thank you guys so much. Once again, you're listening to The Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune, executive producer Kevin Fortune, director, producer, audiograph, who else? Technical director, Jared Morningstar, makeup artist, choreographer, Jared Morningstar. Thank you so much and have a wonderful, great night. Go out and put your liberty into action.